The storm came down over Wyoming like the sky had split open in anger. Wind tore across the open land with a wild, screaming force that bent the dry grass flat and drove ice hard against the earth. Abigail Turner pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her body and kept walking, even though each step felt heavier than the last. Snow had started as a dusting an hour ago, but now it came in sharp white sheets that stung her face and blurred the road ahead. She was 24 years old, cold to the bone, and carrying everything she owned in one faded carpet bag. 3 days earlier, she had still been Miss Turner, the school teacher in the little town of Dry Creek. She had not been rich, but she had been respectable. She had a room above the mercantile, a small stove, a shelf of books, and a purpose that let her stand straight when people looked at her. Then the school board had called a meeting and ended her future in less than 10 minutes. Taxes were down. Funds were gone. The school would close until spring, perhaps longer. They had spoken with regret, but regret did not put bread on a plate or wood in a stove. By the next morning, her room was no longer hers. Mrs. Pierce, who rented it to her, had stood in the doorway wringing her hands and saying she was sorry, but sorry did not change the fact that Abigail could no longer pay. So now she was out on the prairie with $2.40 in her pocket, no family left in Missouri to return to, and winter sweeping over the land like judgment. She stopped near a broken fence post and turned her back to the wind for a moment, trying to catch her breath. Her boots were soaked through. Her gloves had split at the fingertips. She could not feel half her face. Ahead, through the blowing snow, she could just make out the dark line of cottonwoods that marked the creek, and beyond it, the land everyone in Dry Creek knew by sight. The Bennett Ranch. Even in town, people spoke of Noah Bennett with a certain care. He was one of the richest cattlemen in the territory, a man whose land stretched farther than some people rode in a day. He was 35, broad-shouldered, quiet, and known for working beside his men as hard as any of them. People also spoke of his wife, Clara, who had died 2 years earlier from fever after the birth of their youngest son. Since then, Noah Bennett had raised 2 boys alone in that big ranch house, with the help of hired hands and an older cook who came and went when she could. Abigail had seen him only a few times in church and once outside the feed store. He always carried himself like a man who had no time for foolishness. He tipped his hat to ladies, paid his bills on time, and looked at the world as if he expected it to demand more from him before the day was done. A hard gust pushed Abigail sideways. She caught herself against the fence and looked toward the distant ranch house again. Light glowed faint and golden through the storm. Smoke rose from the chimney in a dark, steady line. It looked warm, safe, impossible. Her pride told her to turn away. Her body told her she would freeze before reaching town again. The choice did not feel like a choice at all. She lifted her carpet bag and started toward the house. By the time she reached the front porch, snow clung to her lashes and shoulders in a white crust. Her legs shook so badly she had to grip the post to steady herself. She raised one hand to knock, but the door opened before her fist touched the wood. Noah Bennett stood there in a dark wool shirt with his sleeves rolled down and his face set in surprise. For a long second, neither of them spoke. Then his eyes moved over her, taking in the soaked hem of her dress, the cheap carpet bag, the red cold in her cheeks, and the way she was trying not to sway on her feet. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice deep and calm, "you look about 5 minutes from collapsing." Heat rose in her face despite the cold. "I am sorry to come uninvited, Mr. Bennett. The storm came up worse than I expected." His gaze flicked toward the sky, then back to her. Snow was falling so thick now the yard beyond the porch had nearly disappeared. "You won't make it back to town in this," he said. "Come inside." "I only need a little while to warm up." "You need more than that." He stepped aside and held the door open. "Come in before you freeze on my porch." Abigail hesitated only a heartbeat. Then she crossed the threshold. Warmth wrapped around her so fast it almost hurt. The entry hall was large, with polished floors, high ceilings, and a heavy staircase curving to the second level. A lamp burned on a side table. Somewhere deeper in the house she heard the faint sound of boys arguing. The place was fine by any frontier standard, but there was something missing from it too. It was tidy, strong, and well-built, yet it lacked softness. No flowers, no cheerful clutter, no sign of a woman shaping it day by day. Noah took her carpet bag from her numb fingers before she could protest. "You can have it back when your hands work again," he said. She almost smiled at that. He hung her coat near the stove in the front room and called over his shoulder, "Boys, manners." The sound of boot heels thudding on wood came fast. Two boys appeared in the doorway of the parlor. The older one, around 8, had dark hair and serious gray eyes. The younger, maybe 6, had a narrow face full of open curiosity and a cowlick that refused to lie flat. "This is Miss Turner," Noah said. "She's staying until the storm passes." The younger boy stepped forward first. "Are you the teacher from town?" "I was," Abigail said softly. The older boy did not move. He watched her like a small guard dog deciding whether she was a threat. Noah nodded toward the kitchen. "Coffee's hot, supper too." The kitchen was the largest Abigail had ever seen. A wide cast-iron stove filled one wall. Shelves held jars of beans, flour, and preserves. A stew pot simmered on the stove, filling the room with the smell of onions, beef, and fresh bread. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, like the rest of the house, it felt managed more than lived in. Noah poured coffee into a mug and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed for only a second, but his hand was warm and rough with work. "Sit," he said. She sat. For a few minutes, the only sound was the storm rattling the windows and the boys whispering to each other near the doorway. Abigail held the mug with both hands, letting the heat seep painfully back into her fingers. Noah leaned one shoulder against the counter, watching the weather through the glass. "You lost your position," he said at last. It was not a question. Abigail kept her eyes on the dark surface of the coffee. "Yes." "And your room in town." She looked up then, startled. He met her gaze without apology. "That news travels fast in a small place," he said. She swallowed. "Apparently." He nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "You got family to go to?" "No. Money enough to get east." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Not even close." The honesty of the answer seemed to settle something between them. Noah straightened and crossed to the stove to stir the pot, but Abigail could feel the weight of his thoughts working. Behind her, the younger boy spoke up. "Papa, is she gonna stay for supper?" Noah looked at Abigail. "You are if you've got sense." Samuel, she remembered now. That was the little one's name. The older boy would be Luke. "That is very kind," she said, "but I do not want to impose." Noah turned fully toward her then, his expression unreadable. "Miss Turner, a blizzard's closing in, you've got nowhere to go, and I've got more stew than 3 people can eat. This isn't an imposition, it's common sense." Abigail lowered her eyes. "Then thank you." Supper was quiet but not uncomfortable. Samuel talked enough for everyone, mostly about a calf born early and how he planned to name it Thunder even if his brother said that was a foolish name. Luke ate neatly and said little, though Abigail caught him looking at her more than once. Noah spoke only when needed, yet nothing in his silence felt cruel. He seemed like a man whose words were spent carefully, not withheld for sport. After the meal, the wind worsened. Snow lashed the windows so hard it sounded like handfuls of sand thrown against the glass. Noah checked the back door, set more wood on the fire, and finally turned to her. "You'll stay the night," he said. "No argument." Abigail opened her mouth, then closed it. There was no proper answer left. The storm had made the decision for her. Noah seemed to understand that. He looked at her for a long moment, then said the last thing in the world she expected to hear. "I'm going to say something plain, Miss Turner, because plain is the only way I know how to speak. You need shelter. My boys need a mother. And I need a wife." The room went still. Even Samuel stopped moving. Abigail stared at him, certain she had not heard right. Noah Bennett's face did not change. "I mean a practical marriage," he said. "No lies, no courtship games. A real roof over your head in exchange for a real place in this family. Think on it tonight." Abigail felt her pulse pounding in her throat. Outside, the storm howled around the house like a living thing. Inside, her whole life had just changed again. Abigail did not sleep much that night. Noah had shown her to a small bedroom on the first floor, simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a thick quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. It was more comfort than she had known in weeks, yet every time she closed her eyes, she saw Noah Bennett standing in the kitchen with firelight on his face, calmly offering marriage as if he were discussing cattle prices or winter feed. "You need shelter. My boys need a mother. And I need a wife." No tender words. No promises of love. No soft looks meant to charm her. Just the blunt truth of two lonely lives crossing at the exact moment need had made them both vulnerable. Abigail lay staring at the ceiling while the wind battered the house and tried to think clearly. Marriage was not a matter to take lightly. She had been raised to believe it was sacred, binding, the most serious promise a woman could ever make. And yet life on the frontier had a way of stripping fine ideas down to their bare bones. Sacred things still had to survive winter. Principles still had to eat. Pride still had to sleep somewhere warm when the snow came hard. She turned onto her side and thought of her choices. If she refused Noah's offer, she would have to leave as soon as the roads opened. She had no position, no money worth speaking of, no family willing to take her in. She might find work somewhere as a seamstress or laundress, but not easily, and not before winter swallowed the land whole. A woman alone did not move safely through the territory unless she had luck, protection, or both. Abigail had neither. If she accepted, she would become the wife of a man she barely knew and mother to two boys who still carried the ache of losing the woman who had first filled that place. She would live in a house where another woman's memory still lingered in the walls. She would belong there by law, but perhaps never by heart. Neither path felt easy. One simply looked more survivable. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside buried under a clean, blinding white. Snow lay thick against the windows and drifted high against the porch steps. When Abigail opened her door, she found the house already awake. She could smell bacon and coffee from the kitchen and hear Samuel talking fast enough for 3 children while Luke told him to slow down. She had dressed in her plain blue wool dress before coming out, brushing her hair carefully and pinning it back as neatly as possible. It mattered to her somehow that if she had to answer Noah Bennett's question, she should do it with dignity. When she entered the kitchen, Noah was standing at the stove, turning bacon in a skillet with the same steady competence he seemed to bring to everything. He looked up when she came in but did not speak of the night before. For that, she was grateful. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." Samuel grinned at her from the table. "Papa says the barn roof near disappeared under snow." "Papa says," Luke corrected, without looking up from the biscuit he was buttering, "that you should stop talking with your mouth full." Samuel ignored him. "You can't go anywhere now, we're trapped." Abigail glanced out the window. He was right. The yard had vanished into white mounds and smooth drifts. The road back to town no longer existed. It was only a broad field of untouched snow. Noah set a plate in front of her. "Eat while it's hot." Breakfast passed in an odd kind of peace. Samuel chattered. Luke watched. Noah listened and occasionally answered. Abigail found herself studying the small habits of the household more closely now. Noah cut the boys bacon before handing them their plates. He made sure Samuel drank water before reaching for molasses. He noticed when Luke had only eaten half his eggs and said nothing, but quietly put an extra biscuit beside his plate. It was not softness exactly. It was attention. The kind that came from loving people so steadily you no longer needed to show it in grand ways. After breakfast, Noah sent the boys to bring in kindling from the porch and turned to Abigail once they were out of earshot. "I meant what I said," he told her. She had known he would not circle around the matter. He was not a man for circling. "I believed you did," she replied. He nodded toward the table. "Sit." This time, he sat across from her instead of standing. Morning light washed across the kitchen, pale and cold through the windows, but the room itself was warm. Noah rested his forearms on the table and looked at her with a steadiness that made lying impossible. "I won't dress it up," he said. "I have reasons, and I suspect you need the truth more than pretty words." "That would be preferable." A faint, almost smile touched his face and vanished. "All right. Clara's been gone 2 years. I've managed the ranch and I've managed the boys, but the truth is I'm doing none of it as well as they deserve. There's always one thing too many. If I'm with the cattle, the boys are left to the cook or the hands. If I'm with the boys, work piles up somewhere else. Luke's old enough to notice all the places the house has gone quiet. Samuel's young enough to feel it and not know what he's missing." Abigail listened without interrupting. "I don't need romance," Noah continued. "I need partnership. I need someone with sense. Someone kind, steady, educated. Someone who sees children not as a nuisance but as a duty worth doing right. And you think that someone is me." "I think you're capable," he said. "And I think you're standing close enough to ruin to understand this wouldn't be a game." The words should have stung. Instead, Abigail felt a strange relief at hearing them. His honesty was severe, but it was clean. He was not pretending this was anything but what it was. "And what exactly would you expect of a wife?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Care for the boys. Run the household as you see fit. Keep the place from feeling like a boarding house with children in it. Teach them. See to meals, clothing, order. Be treated with respect in return." "And you?" Noah held her gaze. "I provide for you. This house, this name, protection, security, whatever's needed." She hesitated only a moment. "And marriage in the fuller sense." For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not discomfort, care. "No," he said. "Not unless you ever wanted that, and I would never ask without your clear say. I told you practical, and I meant practical. Separate rooms, separate space. No claims on you beyond what we agree." Abigail let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. He saw it. "You thought I might force more." "I did not know what to think." "You should know that much about me," he said quietly. "I would never force what isn't freely given." The simple certainty in his voice did something unexpected inside her. It did not make this less strange, but it made it feel safer. Before she could answer, the kitchen door burst open and Samuel came in carrying a stack of wood far too large for his small arms. Half of it tumbled to the floor. "I brought enough for all day," he announced proudly. "You brought enough to break your neck on the steps," Noah said, standing. Luke followed behind with a smaller, neater pile. "I told him to take less." Abigail found herself smiling before she could stop it. Samuel noticed at once. "You look prettier when you smile." Luke groaned. "Samuel." "What?" Samuel asked. "She does." Noah bent to gather the fallen wood, but Abigail saw the corner of his mouth lift slightly. The moment was small and ordinary, yet it softened something in the room. For just a breath, the house felt less like a place she had wandered into and more like a place where life kept moving despite sorrow. The day passed slowly under the weight of snow. With the roads closed, there was nowhere for any of them to go. Noah spent part of the morning with his ranch hands digging paths from the porch to the barn. The boys were set to lessons at the kitchen table after dinner, and Abigail, by force of old habit, found herself correcting Samuel's grip on his pencil and showing Luke a quicker way to work through sums. Luke tried very hard to seem unimpressed. But when she explained fractions using biscuit pieces, his eyes sharpened with real interest. "You make it easier than Mr. Harper did," he said before he could stop himself. "Who is Mr. Harper?" "The man Papa hired after school stopped," Samuel said. "He smells like pipe smoke and says numbers should be respected." Luke looked annoyed. "Numbers should be respected." Abigail bit back a smile. "They should, but they don't have to be feared." Luke studied her a moment longer, then slid his slate closer. By afternoon, the sky had turned pale and clear, but the drifts were still too deep for travel. Abigail helped in the kitchen because it was impossible not to. The cook, Mrs. Givens, was snowed in at her own cabin, and Noah had plainly been handling meals himself. He did it better than many men would have, but his bread was dense, his potatoes undersalted, and the shelf where spices should have been arranged was in complete disorder. She found cinnamon beside coffee, flour beside dried beans, and sugar hidden behind canned peaches. Noah watched her silently reorder half the shelf. "I suppose that offends your teacher's soul," he said. "It offends any sensible soul." He gave a low huff that might have been laughter. Later, when the boys had been sent upstairs to wash for supper, Abigail stood alone at the stove, stirring gravy, when Noah came in from outside with snow still clinging to his shoulders. He took off his gloves and laid them near the fire. "They listen to you," he said. She glanced at him. "Children usually listen when they're spoken to like human beings." "Not always." "No," she admitted, "not always." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Noah said, "Luke hasn't brought his slate to anyone without arguing in near a year." That surprised her more than she expected. He's a thoughtful boy. He was easier before his mother died. Noah's voice stayed even, but some quiet depth moved beneath it. Now he watches everything, like he's waiting to see what else the world plans to take. Abigail looked down at the spoon in her hand. "And Samuel?" Noah's face softened. "Samuel fills silence because he doesn't know what to do with it." The answer went straight to her heart. She turned the gravy once more, then asked carefully, "Do they speak of their mother often?" "No. Because they don't want to. Because I don't." He said it plain, the same way he said all difficult things. "I thought less talk might make things easier." "And has it?" He did not answer at once. That was answer enough. That evening, after the boys were in bed and the lamps had been turned lower, Abigail stood by the front window and stared out over the moonlit snow. The ranch lay quiet under its white blanket. The barns, fences, and hills looked silver blue in the cold light, beautiful and lonely all at once. She heard Noah enter behind her, but she did not turn. "Have you decided?" he asked. Her fingers tightened on the curtain edge. She had spent the whole day with his children. She had seen the gaps in the house where a woman's presence had once lived. She had seen Noah move through his duties like a man carrying too much without complaint. And she had seen something else too, something she had not expected. This arrangement might have started from need, but it would not be false. Not in the ways that mattered. He would keep his word. The boys needed someone. And she, whatever pride remained in her, needed the chance not just to survive winter but to belong somewhere again. She turned to face him. "Yes," she said softly, "I will marry you." Noah did not smile at first. He simply looked at her with that deep, searching steadiness of his, as if making certain he had heard right. "You're sure?" "No," Abigail said with honest weakness, "but I am certain enough." Something like understanding passed over his face. "That's probably the best either of us could ask for." He stepped closer, though not too close. "I'll send word to Reverend Cole as soon as the roads open." Abigail nodded. "You'll have this house," he said, "my name and my word that I'll treat you fairly." She swallowed. "And I will do right by your sons." His expression changed then, just enough for warmth to show through the control. "That matters more than anything." The next few days passed in a blur of preparations Abigail had never imagined making for her own wedding. There was no lace, no mother to help fit a veil, no sisters whispering over flowers or guests arriving with laughter. Instead, there was snow packed against the windows, a preacher delayed by weather, and two boys trying to understand what it meant that the teacher from town would soon belong to them. Samuel accepted the idea almost immediately. "Will I call you Ma?" he asked over breakfast on the second morning. Abigail nearly dropped the spoon she was holding. Noah, sitting at the far end of the table, went still. "You may call me whatever feels comfortable," she answered carefully. Samuel thought hard. "I think I'd like Ma." Luke stared at his plate. Abigail waited until Samuel had run off to find his boots before speaking again. "And you, Luke?" He looked up slowly. There was no anger in his face, only caution. "I had a ma," he said. The words were so simple they hurt. Abigail set down the spoon and crossed to his chair, though she did not touch him. Yes, she said gently, you did, and no one is asking you to forget that. Luke searched her face like he was looking for dishonesty and finding none. Then, what am I supposed to call you? Abigail, she said, or Miss Turner until you don't want to. He gave one small nod. It was not affection, but it was not rejection either. For now, that was enough. When the roads finally cleared enough for travel, Reverend Cole arrived in a buggy just before noon, bundled in so many layers he looked twice his normal size. He brought cold air with him, a worn Bible, and an expression that suggested he had questions about the speed of the arrangement but had decided not to ask them aloud. Mrs. Givens made a respectable dinner. Samuel had his hair scrubbed and combed so hard he complained it hurt his thoughts. Luke wore a stiff collar and looked solemn beyond his years. Abigail dressed in her plain blue wool and borrowed a small ivory brooch from Mrs. Givens to fasten at her throat. It was not bridal, not truly. Yet when she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman standing at the edge of a life she had not chosen but was choosing now all the same. The ceremony took place in the front parlor, with only the preacher, Mrs. Givens, the boys, and 2 ranch hands as witnesses. Snow still lined the porch outside. Wind still moved over the plains. The world did not pause to mark what was happening inside that room, but Abigail's heart beat hard enough to make it feel like it should. Noah stood beside her in a dark suit that fit his broad frame too well for her peace of mind. He looked exactly as he had since she met him, strong, controlled, serious. Yet when Reverend Cole began to speak, Abigail noticed Noah's hand tighten once at his side, the only sign that this mattered to him more than he was letting show. When it came time for vows, Abigail's voice trembled only on the first word. Noah's did not tremble at all. Then Reverend Cole pronounced them husband and wife, and silence fell for one strange second. The preacher looked expectantly at Noah. Abigail felt color rush into her cheeks. Noah hesitated just briefly, then looked at her as though asking permission. She gave the smallest nod she could manage. He bent and pressed one light, respectful kiss to her forehead. It was not the kiss of a man claiming romance. It was the kiss of a man honoring an agreement. Samuel clapped. Mrs. Givens sniffed into her handkerchief. Luke kept his face serious, but Abigail caught him looking at her with something new in his eyes. Not trust yet, but the beginning of it. That evening, after the plates had been cleared and the preacher gone, Noah showed her upstairs to a larger bedroom at the end of the hall. "This should be yours," he said. Abigail stepped inside and stopped. The room was lovely in a quiet way, a wide bed, a quilt stitched in rose and cream, a writing desk by the window, a silver-backed brush set on the dresser. And everywhere in the careful arrangement of objects she could feel the shape of another woman's life. Clara. Abigail turned slowly, not wanting to touch anything. "This was her room," she said. "It was," Noah answered. The silence stretched. "I can stay downstairs," Abigail said at last. "I would not mind." Noah shook his head. "You're my wife now, this is your place." She looked at the dressing table again, at the brush, at the folded shawl left in one drawer as though someone had meant to come back for it. "It feels like trespassing." A long pause followed. Then Noah said, more quietly than before, "Maybe it does, but leaving rooms untouched hasn't brought her back. It's only kept this house from living." The words were not cruel, they were tired. Honest in a way that made her chest ache. Abigail turned to look at him. For the first time she saw not just the rancher, not just the capable widower making a practical choice, but the man beneath all that steadiness. A man who had loved deeply enough to still feel the wound of it every day. "I will take care of it," she said softly. "Of the room, of the boys, of all of it." Noah met her eyes. "I know you will." Then, like the gentleman he had promised to be, he stepped back toward the door. "My room is across the hall. If you need anything, knock." Abigail nodded. He hesitated once more, as though wanting to say something else, but whatever it was never made it past his silence. He tipped his head instead and left her alone. Abigail stood in the center of the room for a long while after the door closed. Below she could hear the faint sounds of the household settling for the night. A board creaked, a door latched, Samuel laughed at something Luke muttered. Life went on. Slowly she crossed to the window and looked out over the moonlit ranch. She was married now, not for love, not for dreams, not for anything soft or foolish. She had married for shelter. He had married for help. Between those two truths stood two boys, a quiet house, a grieving man, and a future neither of them yet knew how to shape. Abigail pressed one hand lightly against the cold glass and whispered the only prayer she had strength left for. Let me be enough. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. Abigail's first month as Mrs. Noah Bennett passed like a long winter road, slow, uneven, and full of places where she could have lost her footing if she had not watched each step carefully. She learned the rhythm of the ranch one task at a time. Noah rose before dawn every morning without fail. He liked his coffee black and near scalding. Samuel hated cold wash water and tried to escape it whenever he could. Luke pretended not to care whether his shirt was mended until the one with the torn cuff stayed in his drawer for 2 days, and he asked for it back. The cook, Mrs. Givens, knew everything that happened on the ranch before it happened and pretended she did not. The men ate fast, laughed loud, and watched Abigail with a respectful curiosity that faded once they saw she did not frighten easy and did not flinch from work. She also learned the silences of the house. Clara Bennett's name was almost never spoken, not by Noah, not by the boys unless Samuel asked some innocent question that made the room go still. Not by Mrs. Givens, though Abigail once caught her standing in the doorway of the upstairs hall with a look on her face that was part memory and part sorrow. The silence seemed largest around Luke. He was polite, helpful, careful. He brought in wood without being asked and checked the chicken coop before dark and corrected Samuel with a seriousness that belonged on a much older child. But every kindness Abigail offered him was met first with caution, as if he wanted very badly to trust her and hated himself for wanting it. One evening, nearly 4 weeks after the wedding, Abigail found him in the small room at the end of the hall that had once been a nursery. He was sitting on the floor beside an old cedar chest, holding a little wooden horse with a broken painted saddle. He looked up fast when she appeared in the doorway. "I knocked," she said gently. "You didn't answer." Luke lowered his eyes to the toy again. "I didn't hear." Abigail stepped inside. The room had not been used in a long time. A cradle stood in one corner with a white sheet over it. Dust lay over the windowsill. A faded ribbon hung from a peg on the wall. The whole place felt like a breath held too long. "That was mine," Luke said quietly, lifting the wooden horse a little. "Ma carved it herself." Abigail sat on the floor a careful distance away. She was talented then. She could do all sorts of things. His fingers moved over the horse's worn wood. She made quilts and bread and stories and made Samuel stop crying just by singing. Abigail listened. "Papa doesn't come in here," Luke added. "No. He says some doors can stay shut a while longer." There was no bitterness in the boy's voice, only a tired kind of knowing. Abigail let a moment pass before she asked, "Do you come in here often?" "Sometimes," he swallowed, "so Samuel won't forget her." The answer went straight through her. Luke finally looked at her. His gray eyes were too old for 8 years. "Do you mind?" "No," Abigail said at once. "No, Luke, I would never mind that." He searched her face carefully. "Even if I love her more." Abigail felt her throat tighten. "You should love her more, she was your mother." Something changed in his expression then. Not joy, not relief exactly, but the loosening of a knot pulled too tight. "I didn't know if you'd be angry." "Angry," she repeated softly, "at a boy for loving his mother." He shrugged, trying to hide how much the answer mattered. Some people in town said stepmothers get angry over foolish things. Abigail almost smiled despite the ache in her chest. "Then the people in town have known poor women." Luke looked down at the horse again. "Samuel calls you Ma sometimes." "What?" "I know. Does that bother you?" "No." He nodded slowly. "It bothers me a little." Abigail could have lied then. She could have told him it did not matter, that he would feel differently soon, that all things settled if given time. But he deserved better than easy words. "That's all right too," she said. "Nothing about this has been simple for you." He was quiet a long moment. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I don't want to hurt your feelings. I just don't know how to do this." Abigail looked at the dust, the cradle, the broken horse, the room full of all the things grief leaves behind. "We'll learn," she said, slowly. Luke gave one small nod. A week later, the first real trouble came. It started on a Sunday after church. Abigail had known from the beginning that town would talk. A widower with money marrying a poor school teacher less than a month after she lost her position was exactly the kind of story that gave people something to chew on through winter. Still, knowing it in her head did not make it easier when she felt every eye in Dry Creek turn toward the Bennett family wagon as it rolled up beside the church. Noah climbed down first and held a hand up to help her. His touch was brief, proper, but steady enough that she drew strength from it. Samuel bounced down on his own and nearly slipped on the packed snow. Luke climbed out more carefully, his face already set in the expression he wore when preparing to endure other people. Inside the church, whispers moved like cold air through cracks. "That's her, the teacher. She married fast enough. Lucky thing for her, Noah Bennett needed a wife." Abigail kept her head high and her hands folded in her lap while Reverend Cole preached about mercy and charity to a room full of people who seemed in no danger of practicing either one. After the service, the social hour began outside under a pale winter sun. Men gathered near the hitching posts to talk cattle prices and weather. Women clustered in their best coats and gloves, smiling with mouths more than eyes. Mrs. Talbot reached Abigail first. She was the wife of the banker, all sharp cheekbones and sharper manners. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, with a sweetness so polished it nearly cut, "how fortunate that you found security so quickly." Abigail met her gaze. "I have found a family, Mrs. Talbot." "Of course, in such a fine home as well." Another woman joined them. Then another. Questions came dressed as courtesy. Was ranch life very different from school teaching? Had the boys adjusted to such sudden change? Did she find it difficult stepping into dear Clara's place? Abigail answered each one as calmly as she could, but she could feel the trap beneath every smiling word. They were measuring her against a dead woman beloved by the town, a woman she could never equal because memory had already made her perfect. At last Mrs. Talbot tilted her head and said what the others had been circling all along. "One only hopes the children won't suffer confusion. Losing a mother is hard enough without replacing her too quickly." The words struck hard enough that for a second Abigail could not speak. Then a clear young voice broke in. She didn't replace anybody. All the women turned. Luke stood a few feet away with Samuel beside him. His small hands were curled into fists and his face had gone pale with anger. Mrs. Talbot smiled the way adults do when children say inconvenient things. "Why, Luke, no one is criticizing. We are only concerned for your family." Luke did not waver, then concern quieter. Samuel, sensing battle and eager to join it, grabbed Abigail's hand. "She reads to us and mended my coat and makes the bread not taste like a brick anymore." A few people nearby laughed before they could stop themselves. Mrs. Talbot's face tightened. "She helps with our lessons," Luke went on, voice growing stronger now that he had begun. "And she doesn't make Samuel feel foolish when he gets words wrong. And she told me I don't have to stop loving my ma just because she lives with us now." Silence spread in a widening circle. Abigail felt her eyes sting. Noah had been speaking with one of the ranchers near the wagons, but he turned at the raised voices and came over at once. He looked from Luke's flushed face to Mrs. Talbot's expression to Abigail standing still as stone, and something hard entered his eyes. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Mrs. Talbot gave a light laugh. "None at all, Mr. Bennett, merely conversation." Noah's gaze stayed on her. "Then let me improve it. My wife is to be treated with respect." The simple force of the statement landed like a hammer. Mrs. Talbot gave a stiff nod and stepped back. Noah looked down at Luke. What happened? Luke swallowed. She said Abigail was replacing Ma. For a second, pain moved over Noah's face so quickly most would have missed it. Then he crouched to his son's height. No one replaces your mother, he said quietly. No one ever could. Luke nodded, his mouth trembling once before he locked it still. Then Noah stood and held out his arm to Abigail. We're going home. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Samuel fell asleep against her side halfway there, worn out by outrage. Luke stared out at the frozen fields. Noah drove with his jaw set hard. Only when the boys had been settled inside and Mrs. Givens had taken Samuel upstairs for his nap did Noah come into the kitchen where Abigail stood by the table, trying not to think about how close she had come to humiliation. I should have expected it sooner, he said. Abigail turned. It was bound to happen. That doesn't excuse it. No. He looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. I won't have anyone speak of you like that. Something warm and painful unfurled in her chest. You already spoke, she said softly. So did Luke. At the mention of his son, Noah exhaled slowly and rubbed a hand over the back of his neck. He's been waiting to choose you, he said. Today, I think he did. Abigail looked down at her hands. I did not expect it to matter so much. But it did. Yes. Noah took one step closer, then seemed to think better of whatever else he might have done. You handled yourself well. She gave a small smile. I wanted very badly to pour punch over Mrs. Talbot's hat. That surprised a short, rough laugh out of him, a real one, low and unexpected and warm enough to change the whole room. Abigail stared before she could stop herself. Noah's laughter faded. What? You laugh differently when you mean it. His expression shifted. Do I? Yes. For a moment, they simply stood there, both aware of something new passing between them and neither ready to name it. The second trouble was worse because it did not come dressed in fine clothes and polite cruelty. It came with cut fence wire, missing cattle and blood on the snow. The first sign was small enough that Abigail only half noticed it. Noah came in late one evening with a face gone flat and quiet in the way it did when he was angry. He ate almost nothing at supper. After the boys were asleep, she found him at the kitchen table with one of his ranch hands, Eli Cooper, speaking in low voices over a map of the North Pasture. Something wrong? She asked. Noah looked up, hesitated, then answered plainly. 12 head gone. Wandered. Eli shook his head. Fence was cut clean. Abigail felt cold though the stove was burning high. Rustlers. Noah nodded once. Looks that way. Over the next week, the mood of the ranch changed. Men rode out earlier and returned later. Noah checked the barns himself each night. Luke, who missed little, asked no questions but watched everything. Samuel sensed tension and tried to smother it with extra noise. Then Eli Cooper came in from the west line one afternoon with blood running down the side of his face and one arm hanging useless. Abigail had been kneading dough. She did not even think before moving. She cleared the kitchen table, sent Samuel running for clean towels, and cut Eli's shirt open with the sharp little mending scissors she kept in her pocket. The bullet had only grazed him, but the gash was deep enough to need cleaning and stitching. Noah stood beside her as she worked, his face like carved stone. He was alone. Abigail asked while she threaded the needle with steady hands she did not feel. He shouldn't have been, Noah said. But yes. Eli spat into a rag. 3 of them, maybe 4, saw me coming and took a shot without warning. The room seemed to hold its breath. These men were not just stealing. They were making themselves known. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Noah stood at the front window with a rifle in his hands and said the thing she had been fearing. They may come here next. Abigail was folding bandages by the stove. She looked up slowly. Then what do we do? Noah turned toward her. Firelight cut deep shadows across his face. I'll keep the boys safe. That is not what I asked. His eyes narrowed slightly. Abigail set the bandages down. I am not made of glass, Noah. I know that. Do you? Because every time trouble comes, you look at me like my only use is to gather children and hide. His jaw tightened. If men with guns come onto my land, I don't intend for my wife to be standing in front of them. And I don't intend to leave you to face them alone. The words hung between them. Noah stared at her for a long second, then said quietly, "Can you shoot?" "Yes." "Truth." She held his gaze. "My father taught me at 11, rabbits first, tin cans after. I was better than my brothers." Something almost like approval flickered in his eyes despite the gravity of the moment. "All right," he said at last. "If it comes to that, you take the boys to the cellar first. Then you do what you must." It was not exactly permission, but it was the first time he had looked at her not only as protector of his household, but as someone who could stand beside him in danger. The attack came 3 nights later. Abigail woke to shouting and the crack of gunfire. For one stunned second she did not understand what she was hearing. Then Samuel screamed from the room down the hall, and every thought in her mind sharpened into action. She ran first to the boys. Luke was already out of bed, white-faced but awake. Samuel was crying outright, tangled in his blanket. "Get your boots," Abigail ordered. "Now." Another shot split the night. Somewhere below a man shouted. Another answered. Abigail dragged coats over the boys' nightshirts and hurried them downstairs through the dark hall, one hand on Samuel's back, the other gripping Luke's wrist. The root cellar door was hidden beneath the pantry floor. Noah had shown it to her 2 days earlier without explaining why. She understood now. "Inside," she whispered. Samuel clung to her. "I'm scared." "I know, darling." She crouched and held his face between her hands. "Listen to me. Luke will stay with you. You do not come out until Papa or I open this door. Do you understand?" Luke nodded before Samuel could. Abigail kissed Samuel's hair once, then looked at Luke. In the dim light the boy looked far older than his years. "Keep him quiet," she said. Luke swallowed hard. "What about you?" "I'm coming back." It was not entirely true, and both of them knew it. She closed the trapdoor, shoved the flour barrel halfway over it, and turned just as the front door shook under a violent blow. The house was no longer safe. Abigail grabbed Noah's shotgun from the wall pegs near the kitchen and moved into the hall. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might shake the gun in her hands, but when she raised it, the barrel stayed steady. The front door burst inward. 2 men came through first, both masked with scarves, both armed. One saw her and laughed in disbelief. "Well now," he said, "Bennett's got his wife guarding the house." Abigail's voice came out low and clear. "Take one more step." He did. She fired. The blast filled the hall with thunder and smoke. The man went down hard with a cry, clutching his thigh. The second swung his pistol up, but before he could fire, Noah came in through the side door like a force of nature, rifle raised. "Drop it," he said. There was something in his tone that made even armed men listen. The rustler hesitated. Noah did not. The man dropped the pistol. For a few seconds after that, the whole world seemed made of noise. Shouts outside, running feet, horses screaming in the yard. Then one by one, the sounds began to die. Ranch hands dragged 2 more men in from the barn. One was bleeding from the shoulder. Another had his hands tied behind him and hate burning in his eyes. Only when the danger had passed did Abigail start to shake. Noah turned from the captured men and looked at her. The look on his face was unlike anything she had seen there before. Shock, fear, pride, relief. All of it struck through with something deeper that seemed almost too raw to show. "You all right?" he asked. She tried to answer and found she could not. She only nodded. Noah crossed the hall in 2 long steps and took the shotgun gently from her hands. His fingers closed over hers for just a moment too long. Then he set the gun aside and cupped the back of her head with one broad hand as if needing to make certain she was real. "You should have been in the cellar," he said, but his voice broke on the words. "The boys were in the cellar," Abigail whispered back. "I wasn't leaving you to them." For one suspended second they stood too close, not by accident, not from convenience, by need. Then Noah drew a long breath and stepped back. "The boys," he said. Abigail nodded and ran for the pantry. Luke had Samuel wrapped in both arms in the far corner of the cellar. When she opened the door, Samuel burst into tears again and flung himself at her. Luke rose more slowly, but when she touched his shoulder, he leaned into her hand for one brief second before mastering himself. "Is Papa alive?" he asked. "Yes." "Are we safe?" "Yes." The word felt like a prayer. By morning, the truth had begun to settle over the ranch. The rustlers had not been ordinary thieves after all. One of the captured men started talking quickly once he realized Noah Bennett intended to hand them over to the territorial marshal instead of burying them somewhere nameless. There was money behind them. A land agent from Cheyenne. Rumors of the railroad pushing through. Men trying to break big ranches cheap by stealing stock, cutting lines, and making families fear they could not hold what they owned. Noah listened to all of it with cold fury. Abigail listened too, but her mind kept circling back to the moment in the hall after the gunshot, when Noah had looked at her not like a burden he had to protect or even a partner in a practical arrangement, but like a man seeing the woman he could not bear to lose. The days that followed changed something between them. Not openly at first. Neither of them seemed to know how. But Noah began coming to the kitchen after supper even when he had no reason to. He asked about the boys' lessons. He listened when Abigail spoke about repairing the little room upstairs for a schoolroom in spring. He smiled more, though still rarely, and whenever he did, she felt it somewhere low and dangerous in her chest. One evening, nearly a week after the attack, Abigail was standing at the sink washing cups when Noah came in from the porch and shut the door behind him. He had been out seeing off the deputy who had come for the prisoners. "They're gone," he said. "That's good." He stayed where he was for a moment, then he crossed the room. Abigail dried her hands slowly and turned. The air between them changed. "I owe you more than thanks," Noah said. "You owe me nothing." "That's not true." His voice was quiet but more unguarded than she had ever heard it. "You stood in my hall with a gun while men broke into this house. You protected my sons. You protected me from coming home to something I could not have borne." Abigail's breath caught. "Noah." He shook his head once like a man struggling with words he had not planned to speak. "I asked you for a practical marriage because practical was all I thought I had left to offer. A roof, a name, fair treatment. I told myself that was enough, for you, for me." He was close enough now that she could see the strain in his face, the truth of every word costing him something. "But it isn't enough anymore," he said. The world seemed to go very still around them. Abigail could hear only the faint ticking of the wall clock and the sound of her own pulse. Noah looked at her as if there was no safe way back from this, and he had decided not to look for one. "I respect you," he said. "I trust you. My boys love you. And somewhere between watching you teach Samuel his letters and hearing Luke defend you in front of half the town and seeing you stand armed in that hallway, I began to feel something I did not ask for and did not expect." Abigail's eyes burned. He stepped 1 inch closer. "No more." "I care for you, Abigail," he said. "Not out of gratitude, not out of duty. As a man cares for the woman he wants beside him. And if that is unfair, if it asks more than we agreed, then say so and I'll bear it. But I cannot keep pretending this is still only practical." The words went through her like light through ice. All the lonely days. All the careful boundaries. All the nights she had lain awake telling herself that respect was enough, that she should ask for nothing more than a place in the house and affection from the children. All of it broke open at once. She took one breath, then another. "It is not unfair," she said, and her voice trembled despite her best effort. "Because I have been pretending too." Noah's face changed. Abigail felt tears spill before she could stop them, but she did not look away. "I told myself I would be content simply to belong here," she whispered, "to have work, safety, purpose. But every day I have wanted more and hated myself for it. I wanted your real smiles. I wanted the way you look for me when you come in from the cold. I wanted to matter to you for more than usefulness." "You do." "I know that now." She laughed softly through tears. "And I love your boys with my whole heart. I think perhaps I began there because it felt safer, but somewhere along the way, Noah Bennett, I fell in love with you too." He closed his eyes once, just once, as if the words struck deeper than he was prepared for. Then he opened them and came to her. His hands rose slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished. She did not. He touched her face with a tenderness that undid her more thoroughly than any grand gesture could have. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. Instead, Abigail reached for him. Noah kissed her then, and nothing about it was practical. It was not the respectful touch of the wedding day, or the careful distance of a man honoring an agreement. It was warmth after winter. It was relief. It was hunger held back too long and then gentled by care. Abigail felt the strength of him, the restraint of him, and beneath both, the deep gratitude of a man who could scarcely believe he had been given a second chance at joy. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing hard. From the doorway came a small, triumphant voice. "I knew it." They sprang apart. Samuel stood there in his nightshirt, hair wild from sleep and delight blazing across his face. Luke was behind him, more composed but no less aware. "You were kissing for real," Samuel announced. Luke folded his arms. "That was obvious." Abigail put a hand over her flushed face. Noah did something astonishing. He laughed, not the short, rough sound from before. A full, helpless laugh that bent his shoulders and made both boys grin in answer. Samuel ran across the kitchen and threw himself at Abigail's waist. "Does this mean you'll stay forever?" Abigail dropped to her knees and gathered him close. Luke came only a second later, slower but no less certain, and leaned into her side. "Yes," she said, looking up at Noah over their heads, "if your father will have me." Noah's face softened into something so open and full of love that it nearly broke her all over again. "I will," he said, "every day if you let me." Spring came early that year. The snow melted in silver streams across the fields, the air softened. New grass pushed through the brown. Calves were born. The schoolroom upstairs opened with 6 children from neighboring ranches attending lessons under Abigail's steady hand. Mrs. Talbot grew less sharp after Luke corrected her grammar in front of the postmaster. Samuel learned to spell horse, thunder, and biscuit in the same week, and believed this made him nearly a scholar. Luke smiled more often, though always like he had to be surprised into it. The house changed too. Not all at once. Not in ways that disrespected what had come before. Clara's shawl was folded carefully into a cedar chest with her name spoken aloud sometimes now, gently, honestly, without the whole room going still. Her memory no longer lived like a ghost shut behind a door. It lived as part of the family story. Luke told Abigail once that his mother would have liked the schoolroom. Samuel announced that both his mothers were pretty, one in heaven and one in the kitchen. Noah had to leave the room after that because his eyes had filled too quickly to trust his voice. And then, on a warm evening in late May, Noah asked Abigail to marry him again. They were already husband and wife in every legal sense. But he stood with her on the porch at sunset while the boys chased fireflies in the yard and said, "The first time I offered you shelter. This time I'd like to offer you my whole heart proper." Abigail laughed and cried in the same breath before saying yes. The second wedding was held under the cottonwoods by the creek with half the town present and the other half wishing they had been invited sooner. There were flowers this time. Music too. Samuel nearly burst with pride carrying rings in a little velvet box too large for his hands. Luke stood beside his father looking solemn until Noah squeezed his shoulder, and then the boy smiled in a way so like his mother that even Noah had to blink hard. When Abigail walked toward them in a simple cream dress sewn by Mrs. Givens and half the women in Dry Creek, she did not feel like a woman rescued from ruin. She felt chosen. This time, when Reverend Cole asked Noah Bennett if he would take Abigail as his wife, Noah answered before the preacher had fully finished the question. "With all I am." And when he kissed her under open sky and the warm gaze of family and friends, there was no agreement in it. No bargain, no caution, only love. That night, after the guests had gone and the boys had at last fallen asleep from too much cake and excitement, Abigail stood at the upstairs window of the room that no longer felt borrowed. The ranch lay peaceful beneath the stars. The wind moved soft through the grass. Below, she could hear Noah closing the barn doors for the night. Months earlier, she had come to this place desperate, cold, and nearly broken, with nothing but a worn carpet bag and a future closing fast around her. She had accepted a practical proposal because survival demanded it. But somewhere between a frightened little boy clutching a wooden horse, a stern man laughing in a kitchen, and a gunshot in a dark hallway that taught them both what mattered most, that practical arrangement had become the truest thing in her life. She heard Noah's boots on the stairs and turned before he reached the door. When he came in, she went to him at once. "You look thoughtful," he said, drawing her close. "I was," Abigail answered. "I was thinking that I came here because I needed shelter." Noah brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "And now?" She smiled up at him, full and certain and no longer afraid. "Now I am home.